Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jadon Knight. I am a clinical psychologist. I am a past membership chairman of the Barbados Society of Psychology, and this afternoon I am the moderator of today's session. I want to welcome everyone who has logged in to Facebook and everybody who has registered for today's session on Zoom to our annual Career in Psychology student information session. This year, because of COVID, it is now a virtual session. So a bit of housekeeping. Most persons will not be able to speak to each other um, vocally. You have to, if you have questions during this session, we will ask you to ask questions in the Q&A tab at the bottom. Okay. This afternoon, we're going to have 4 presenters representing different specializations in psychology. We have this afternoon Dr. Andrea Dennison. Unfortunately, Ms. Vernie Sobers could not make it this afternoon, as she will be replaced by Mr. Sean Pilgrim, who will join us a bit later. We have Ms. Vanya Patrick Drakes and Dr. Jacqueline Ben. Okay. Today we'll run our sessions by having each presenter have 8 to 10 minutes of their presentation, and they will take about 5 minutes for questions afterwards. So there will be a presentation right immediately after. You'll be able to ask your questions, and then we move on to the next presenter. All right. So let's begin. Let's start with educational psychology. Our educational psychologist this afternoon is Dr. Andrea Dennison. Dr. Dennison is a chartered psychologist and registered educational psychologist. She has been living and working here in Barbados for 9 years and is employed by Lockerbie College. She has been a psychologist for 18 years and prior to this was a teacher for 9 years, teaching in mainstream and special education settings. She has a doctorate in psychology, a master's in educational psychology, a master's in special education, as well as a degree in psychology and a postgraduate certificate in education. So, without further ado, Dr. Dennison.
Thank you, Jadon. Good afternoon, everybody. Nice to see you all. I'm just going to share my screen with you. So hopefully this works okay. So hopefully you should see a PowerPoint on the screen. I should say that in North America, my profession, educational psychology, is termed of as school psychology, but everywhere else in the world, it's educational psychology. So this is just a little kind of a visual bit of humor there about looking at what different perceptions of my job actually entails. But hopefully as we go through this, you will get a bit more of an understanding of what it's like to be an educational psychologist and, more importantly, how you actually become an educational psychologist. Okay, so I'm just moving on to the next slide. All righty. So what is it that we do? Many of you who are maybe currently doing undergraduate psychology courses have maybe learnt a lot about child development or various forms of disorders, many different things. But the thing about educational psychology is it's about applying that theory and that research into people's everyday lives. And that's kind of our motto, I would say. It's about enhancing the learning, development and well-being of children and young people. We usually get called upon when somebody perceives there is a problem, and often that perceived problem is located within the child. You know, this child isn't focused, this child is lazy. But as we will see, it's not just about working with the child, it's working with the system around the child. And our job is to help solve the problem that we are presented with, or the perception of the problem. So although the child or the young person is the focus of our work, much of our work actually occurs with the adults around that child, whether it's the parents, family members, the guardians, teachers in school. So it's not always direct work with a child. And for me, I think one of the things about applying psychology is about enabling others. So it's not about telling other people what they should be doing. It's about enabling them through a process to come to enable them to inform their own decisions and solve their own problems. So who do we work with? Well, educational psychologists are trained to work with children right up to young adults, 0 to 25. We also, of course, like I just said, work with parents and guardians and family members. And in fact, as much as possible in my work, I involve parents and wider family members when appropriate. We also, of course, work with teachers, usually within the school setting. And then if you imagine concentric circles, we work with the wider system, with maybe school managers, principals, and even governments, local governments or local authorities, depending on which country or which part of the world you're practicing in. We also work alongside many other professionals. OT is occupational therapy, SALT is speech and language therapy. In an ideal world, we'll have a multi-agency meeting where we would all work together and all jointly problem solve issues together. But as I think we all probably know, the ideal world doesn't always happen. So it might be a quick phone call or a quick email. So we very much work with the child in the context that they're in. So what are the kind of things that we do? Well, a lot of my role involves consultation through a process consultation approach, which is basically where we get as many people together as possible, typically the child, if they're developmentally and chronologically old enough, the parents or the guardians and the teacher, just to have a bit of time and space together to jointly problem solve what might be going on. And through that process, we can actually sometimes come up with some really good strategies and jointly agreed action. Our work also involves assessment and intervention. For me, it's not so much about diagnosis and treatment, because that's more of a medical-based model. It's more about assessing needs, which might not just be individual child needs, they might be needs within the wider system, and intervention. And that would either be intervention by ourselves or enabling others to do different types of intervention. We do also get involved in therapeutic work using a variety of approaches, and also looking at the wider system. We might get involved with training teachers and other school staff and providing in-service training. Supervision staff support can be quite a very important part of our job, and that's supervision of other psychologists, but also supporting staff. Teachers have a very stressful job, particularly in the current climate with COVID. So often being there to be able to contain those anxieties and have a teacher be able to offload any issues onto you can sometimes be very helpful. We also get involved in research, and some of us may also work in university settings as well. So the types of needs that we get called upon are social, emotional, behavioural issues and mental health needs, learning difficulties, cognition, which is about memory and thinking and problem solving, executive function. We'd also be involved with children with more complex developmental disorders, maybe physical disabilities as well, sensory impairments, and with social communication and language needs, such as maybe autism spectrum. Again, making it wider, we would also get involved in not just looking at the individual needs of a child, but also about the support systems around that child, looking at classroom management, teaching approaches, supporting parents in helping with those needs. So as you may have gathered, typically our work is mainly school-based. We're not a clinic-based profession like other psychologists maybe are. Most of our work takes place actually within a school setting. And that can be any school setting. I've just listed a few there. We can be employed by many different organizations, depending again on the local needs that you are working in and the country you're working in. So for example, here in Barbados, I'm employed by a school where I work in that school for half the week, and the other half the week I work in other schools as an external consultant. But people can be employed by the government, NGOs such as the United Nations, charities. But in Barbados, most psychologists, not necessarily educational psychologists, but most psychologists seem to be in private practice. And as well as working in educational settings, we may be involved in other areas of the community as well. So those are our main work environments. So I'm just going to give a little breakdown of a typical day for me. This is my school-based work, the school that I'm employed by. You can see here the things in red are what I may be doing, and you can see there's a great deal of diversity there, from therapeutic work to observing a child and feeding back to a teacher, and working on a wider level, actually looking at the planning and remedial provision for the school. In the purple, that's who I might be working with. So again, it might be an individual student or a group, or it might be teachers. And the green is the type of needs that I might do in a typical day, or type of needs that I might be addressing. So it's never a dull moment. It's also very tiring as well. You can see there, any breaks that I get, I very rarely actually have a break. I'm usually filling that with admin, but it is never a dull moment. So it's always very interesting work. And here is an example of what I might do in a typical day as an external consultant. And again, there you can see the diversity in the work. Sometimes might be with a 3.5-year-old, then it might be with a 11, 12-year-old or a 15-year-old, doing many different levels of work. So for example, this morning at 7:30, I was working with a Form 1 student, carrying out some cognitive assessments. And then when I'd finished that, I had to quickly zip in the car to another school to have a meeting with the principal, the form tutor, the parent and the student, to jointly problem solve that child's needs, to enable the school to maybe do things differently, or jointly problem solving strategies to put in place to help that student. And now here I am with you. And after this, I'm actually going to be working therapeutically with an older secondary school student. So it's a very varied job, very tiring, but it's very rewarding as well. So how do you become an educational psychologist? Well, you do need a degree in psychology. And if you've done a degree where there's a major and a minor component, most of your undergraduate degree needs to be in psychology. You also need to have experience of working with children, not just like a babysitting job, but usually through teaching or working as a support assistant in school. And generally that needs to be for at least 2 years. You would then need to do a training course in educational psychology. For those of you out there that are really interested in this, I would strongly advise you to do a doctorate rather than a master's. That's because over the years, the profession has moved to a doctorate profession in many countries of the world. So you're better off doing a doctorate, and it needs to include academic research and practicum components. Here in the Caribbean, unfortunately, there's no supervised practice doctorates or masters. You can do postgraduate study in educational psychology, but it doesn't give you the supervised practice. Remember what I said earlier, it's not just about the theory, it's about applying the theory into real world contexts. And actually, to be registered as a psychologist here in Barbados, I think it's currently you do need 500 hours minimum of supervised practice. So at the moment, unfortunately, most of the courses are in the US or the UK, which can be very expensive. I can't talk to the US because I'm from the UK, but there are scholarships and there is funding available if you're lucky. And I'm aware that I've gone, excuse me, over time, so I'll quickly zip through this. Job prospects, many different job prospects. Not all governments do have educational psychologists, particularly in the Caribbean. So that's, you know, if you've got any connections there with the government, that's the thing to try and push. NGOs like the UN, they often want short-time, like 3-6 month consultancy positions, and that's usually working on a systems level rather than an individual child level. You might be working for a charity, you might be employed by a school, as I am, or a group of schools, or work in private practice. There's lots of different opportunities. And currently, I think there's only 3 of us registered on the island. All of these here, I'm not going to go through them, but even if you don't study educational psychology to become an educational psychologist, there's other possibilities and lots of other related professions as well. And just to quickly end on what I've put up there, those are just some of the theories of psychology that I employ in my work. You might ask another psychologist or educational psychologist, they might do a very different presentation or have very different background. These are the approaches that I value very much in the role that I do. Okay, so sorry I've gone over time there, Jadon.
That's no problem.
Stop the share now. Okay.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dennison. We'll open the floor now for about 5 minutes for some questions. Now, don't forget, if you have questions for us, please use the Q&A link at the bottom, the Q&A tab. And you can ask questions in there. We'll be looking out for those. Just really quickly, Dr. Dennison, have you been able to speak to any students over the years about getting into psychology personally? Have you been able to help with their training, anything like that?
Yeah, there's in the school that I work, we've sometimes actually had a couple of counselling psychologists doing supervised practice with us. There's also, she was a math teacher at Lockerbie, and she is actually now, she's Barbadian. She went to the UK to train as an educational psychologist, and she's stayed in the UK, which is the irony. I've come here, she's gone over there. But yes, so I'm always open to, if anybody wants to contact me to ask about possibilities, please do so.
Good. All righty. Selena Mohammed asks, is there a difference between a PsyD and a PhD, and which one has more benefits?
Yep, that's a very good question. This is my understanding of the difference. A PhD is more of a research doctorate with less, well, certainly in the UK, if you wanted to train to be a professional psychologist, a registered practicing psychologist, you wouldn't do a PhD. You would do a PsyD or some other acronym, like a lot of the educational psychology in the UK is a DEd Psych, doctorate in educational psychology. So a PsyD is much more practical based, much more supervised practice. So personally, I would recommend a PsyD rather than a PhD, but other people may have a different opinion.
Good. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Dennison.
You're
We'll
welcome.
move right along to Miss Vanya Patrick Drakes, who is a counseling psychologist. Ms. Drakes is a registered counseling psychologist and currently serves as a school counselor within the secondary level. She holds a master's degree in counseling psychology with distinction from the University of the West Indies, and she is currently pursuing a PhD in social policy. An avid writer and author, she also regularly freelances with a local health and wellness magazine. She enjoys working with adolescents, facilitating workshops and keynote presentations on all things mental health and wellness. So thank you very much. Take it away, Ms. Patrick Drakes.
Thank you, Jadon, and good afternoon, everyone. I am also going to share my screen, and I hope everyone can see my presentation, my slide. Is something wonky going on here? One second. Perfect. Okay, so I'm excited to explore with you the option of a career as a counseling psychologist. And for the next few minutes, I'll be speaking briefly about what counseling psychologists are and why they're needed, how you can become a counseling psychologist, and career prospects and possibilities within this subfield. So, why counseling psychology? We could perhaps put forward the year 2020 thus far as exhibit A, B, and C of why counseling psychologists are needed. Life does not always or ever travel along a perfect planned trajectory, right? So as humans, we experience moments of despair, isolation, uncertainty, work stress, conflict, school drama, family drama, goodness. And sometimes these experiences become pervasive and debilitating, and they can affect the way that we function in our day-to-day lives. So this is where a counseling psychologist can step in. Counseling psychologists help their clients with their personal and interpersonal issues so that they can live optimally. In other words, we can help persons with personal problems like school or work stressors, grief or loss,
Sorry, Miss Patrick, just 1 second. Just ensure that your screen is actually being shared.
Is it not?
No, just check really quickly at the bottom.
Let me share again.
There you go. I think that is there. That's it.
Perfect.
Already continue.
All right. So yeah, so we can help persons with their personal and interpersonal issues so that they can live optimally. So like I was saying, in other words, we can help persons with personal problems like school or work stressors, grief or loss, unhelpful thought patterns, and we can help persons with issues that they may have relating to other people. So social anxiety, family disputes, relationship challenges, all at the end of the day to allow persons to be able to live their best lives. So we're wanting persons to be able to function ably on a day-to-day basis. Who can see a counseling psychologist? Well, the answer is whoever may benefit from one. Counseling psychologists can work with clients across their lifespan. This means that we may work with children, with adolescents, and with adults straight through to their older years. We can work with individuals, we can work with couples, with families, or even with groups of strangers. How does it work? Well, you may be familiar with the stereotypical therapy session where the client stretches out on a couch and the therapist says, okay, well, perhaps you can tell me a bit about your childhood. Well, techniques that a counseling psychologist may use are varied, and they depend largely on what theoretical approach the psychologist ascribes to. So I'll give you some brief, very simplified examples. Let's say that you had a really significant attachment to your cell phone. And this preoccupation is taking up all of your mental energy when you're studying. You're guilty, but you can't stop doing it. Your loved ones say that they don't see you anymore. You don't look them in the eye anymore. Whenever you go out to eat, you have your phone stuck to your face. And when you're sleeping, you can't sleep unless you scroll through WhatsApp and then Snapchat and then IG. Well, different counseling psychologists may approach this in different ways depending on their theoretical approach, right? So for example, and again, very simplified, a humanistic approach, they would find the counseling psychologist showing genuine care and interest and unconditional positive regard for their client. So they may say, you know, you are worthy, you're capable, you have the power to stop using that cell phone. A behavioral approach, the counseling psychologist may encourage you to modify your preoccupation with the cell phone by using positive or negative reinforcement. So perhaps every time you pick up your cell phone when you shouldn't be using it, you might have to put $1 in a jar, right? And that might serve as a deterrent. Or on the flip side, let's say that you leave the phone alone and you do something that you're meant to do on your to-do list. You may allow yourself something pleasant as a reward. Or a counseling psychologist may use an integrative approach, taking techniques from many different approaches as they see fit. It's important to note that counseling psychologists are not magicians. So it's not a case where clients present their concerns and the counseling psychologist says, aha, I know what your problem is. Here is what you're going to do. Here's all the advice and you go do that. And now your problem is fixed. That's not quite how it works. So a lot of the work comes on the part of the client themselves, with the counseling psychologist acting as a guide, as a facilitator. So how do I get there? How would I become a counseling psychologist? Let's look at the academic, professional, and personal requirements that may be needed. Now, I can speak on the way to become a counseling psychologist here in Barbados, but of course other regions may have different requirements, best verified through careful research. So the academic pathway first. Most persons may start off with an undergraduate degree in psychology, but that is not necessarily always the case. For example, my undergraduate degree, I started with a double major in cognitive science and neuroscience. My intention initially was not to go into psychology. I was more interested in neurosurgery and so, but I changed directions, right? So you don't always have to start off with the undergraduate degree in psychology, but you do have to have a master's degree in counseling psychology here in order to become a counseling psychologist. This is different from other places in the world. Like Dr. Dennison mentioned, many practicing psychologists in other places do have to have a doctorate degree. So a doctorate degree would be very useful if you're pursuing a career as a psychologist. I know UWI Cave Hill offers a Master of Science degree in counseling psychology, which to my knowledge is a 2-year program. It was a 2-year program when I did it, if pursued full time. And it does have a practicum component, which is very useful. You're able to be placed different places, either in Barbados or when I did it regionally. And we really learned a lot, my cohort and I, during our placements. You should also be an active member of a professional body of psychologists. And of course, here in Barbados, that professional body is the Barbados Society of Psychology. And if you're currently pursuing an accredited graduate degree in psychology, you can apply to join BSP as a student member. This is helpful for a number of reasons. It provides you with exposure to the field and issues in the field. It gives you the opportunity to gain and share knowledge, and of course to ask questions from seasoned practitioners. And it gives you the opportunity to network with persons in your field of interest, all very important. Once you have your master's degree and you're a member of a professional body, you're well on your way. Sorry about that. It doesn't matter, right? In order to become acknowledged as a registered practicing psychologist in Barbados, you have to become registered by the Paramedical Professions Council, whom I believe have changed their name from Paramedical Professions Council to Allied Health Professionals. They have a number of requirements, and again, that's best verified by contacting them directly. Becoming a new psychologist is a little bit like learning how to drive. So yes, you might get your driver's license, but that doesn't mean that you are automatically a pro on the road. You might still have some issues at the Warrens roundabout. You might have issues with parallel parking, jam busting, reversing. So it's the same with becoming a psychologist and practicing. You're not going to want to practice without some sort of mentorship or without some sort of professional sounding board. Having a seasoned mentor in the field or shadowing someone for a while is extremely, extremely helpful. Now, let's talk about personal competencies. Have you ever engaged with a service provider and thought, like, why are you in this job? Why are you here? You don't seem to enjoy what you're doing. You look very unhappy, very miserable, very disgruntled. It's really important to choose a career that aligns with your personal strengths. Counseling psychologists have to listen to persons talking about themselves, and that's a very large part of the job. Or on the opposite end, you might have a client who comes in and they don't really want to say anything at all. So they're silent initially. Would you and the client just be sitting there staring at each other because you're feeling awkward and they're feeling awkward and you're just both feeling awkward together? Are you comfortable developing a rapport and creative enough to get the communication ball rolling? Are you approachable? Are you pleasant? Are you a great listener, or are you likely to interject with your own personal anecdote as soon as someone starts opening up? So they tell you something, you say, yeah, you know, that same thing happened to me years ago. Goodness, that it stressed me out so much. And you know what I do? No, we obviously can't do that. So it is important to have the correct listening skills. We should also have strong ethics. So would you be able to remain bound by professional ethical standards? Confidentiality is a big one, especially in small islands like Barbados. You can't be confiding in friends or family members about how, you know, who come to me yesterday was Miss Drake, her granddaughter, and you know, she's pregnant and she might terminate. We can't do that. And so yes, ethics, very important. And then on the other hand, there are some things that we are duty bound to report, no matter how uncomfortable it may feel. You have to know your own personal and professional limits as well. So yes, we are all meant to be objective, but we are human at the end of the day. So some psychologists may have a difficult time with certain cases or topic areas. And when this happens, it's best to be self-aware and know which lines you have drawn in the sand and be able to refer to another professional. So I'm going to move very quickly along. I had some other personal competencies, but I believe I'm running out of time. So prospects and possibilities.
Yes, we have about 2 minutes.
No problem. What does it working as a counseling psychologist look like? So counseling psychologists can practice alone. They can share an office with a colleague or colleagues, or with other medical or paramedical professionals. So they may share an office with a doctor or a speech language pathologist, for example, to split the bills. We can also work in hospitals or clinics. We can work in schools or even outside of an office. For example, I know some counseling psychologists may arrange like a garden or a park somewhere tranquil to see their clients, or even the ocean. We have that here, thankfully, in Barbados. Especially this year, I know a lot of professionals have had to move their offices to a virtual space. So you are not mandated to sit in an office on a daily basis if that's not what you want to do. Like Dr. Dennison, I personally am employed within a school, and for me, every single day is different. Outside of therapy, outside of a therapeutic setting, counseling psychologists can also fit well into academia. They can be consultants for employers who are seeking to have a healthier and more productive work environment, right? Persons trained in counseling psychology can also consider the field of law enforcement as probation officers, police officers. Freelance writing is also an option. One suggestion for newcomers that I would have is to perhaps reach out to schools, reach out to the prison in your region or locally, reach out to protective services, medical clinics, gyms, fitness centers. Have a well-written proposal, right? Detailing the importance of mental health care and how having a counseling psychologist like yourself would make a huge difference. Okay, so to close, a career in counseling psychology is a much needed vocation and it can be a rewarding one. So overall, 10 out of 10, I would recommend. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Patrick Drakes. Good plug about membership really quickly. If we have students logged on, if we have practicing psychologists who are logged on as well, who are not a part of the society, feel free to reach out to us at psychologistbarbados@gmail.com or membership.psychologistbarbados@gmail.com. Right, I'm going to open the floor for questions really briefly for about 2 minutes. And in the meantime, what do you find is the hardest part of your role right now?
Ooh, wait, I cut that out because we were running out of time. But the hardest part for me was the compartmentalization, especially when I first began. So when I would be practicing and I'd be speaking with a client, I would take it on. So then I would come home, I would open my door and I'd bawling, coming into my house like, oh my God, I can't. So it was a lot. So it's really, really important, I find, to be able to compartmentalize. Like I care about my clients very deeply. And then when I'm at home, I have to make sure that my home is my space.
Is your space.
My sanctuary. Yeah.
Interesting. Sounds like you engage in self-care often.
I try.
Good. That's always the best way to be. All right, well, thank you so much, Ms. Patrick Drake.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to clinical psychologist Dr. Jacqueline Ben. Dr. Jacqueline Ben is a clinical psychologist who works as the psychological counselor at the University of the West Indies, Cape Hill campus. Dr. Ben spent 10 years as a clinical psychologist at the psychiatric hospital, most of which was spent in the forensic unit. She worked for several years on a part-time basis at the UE until taking up full-time duties in 2014 as a psychological counselor. In this role, she coordinates counseling services through the Office of Student Services and provides personal counseling and mental health services to students at Cape Hill. She also provides outreach in the area of mental health and to faculties and departments on campus. So, up next, Dr. Jacqueline Ben. Dr. Ben, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I'm trying to put up my screen. Right.
There you go. All righty.
Are you seeing my screen?
I absolutely am.
Okay.
Good. All righty.
All righty. So, good afternoon, everybody. As Jaden has said, I'm clinical psychologist Jacqueline Ben. And one of the important aspects about clinical psychology is it encompasses a lot of what Ms. Patrick Drakes would have said, but it tends to go more into the more entrenched and chronic mental health problems. So taking a quotation from...
Sorry, really quickly, Dr. Ben, you want to put your presentation into the slideshow view?
Oh, okay. Oh, yes. Sorry about that.
That's no problem.
There you are. Right. So the APA, or the American Psychological Association, says that they describe clinical psychology as providing continuing and comprehensive mental and behavioral health for individuals and families. So some quick snippets on the history of clinical psychology. It has its foundations in psychometric and dynamic areas of psychology. So psychometric, looking at measurement, individual differences, mental testing, and the dynamic, this may ring a bell and make you think of Freud. Yes, that would be true. And in the dynamic aspect, it looks at motivation, adaptation, and personality change. It has its roots in European psychology, but as it progressed, it flourished and continues to bloom in America, where it kind of mushroomed in from the 1890s. And the first psychological clinic was founded in 1896 at the University of Pennsylvania by Leitner Whitmer. Now, what is clinical psychology? According to the American Psychological Association, clinical psychology is the psychological specialty that provides continuing and comprehensive mental and behavioral health care for individuals and families. It provides consultation to agencies and communities, provides training, education, and supervision. And there's also research-based practice. Clinical psychology is a specialty in breadth and depth. It is one that broadly includes severe psychopathology and is marked by comprehensiveness and an integration of knowledge that you would have gained from your theoretical in class in your university, and skill from practice from a broad array of disciplines within and outside of psychology proper. So being a clinical psychologist, there's so many other areas of endeavor that we incorporate into understanding and providing therapeutic intervention for clients. And the scope of clinical psychology encompasses all ages, multiple diversities, and varied systems. So we engage with every individual, group, and community. So one of the hallmarks of clinical psychologists is their training in psychological testing and assessments, as I would have mentioned briefly before. And the clinical psychology addresses behavioral and mental health issues faced by individuals across the lifespan. So from birth, or you may say, until death. It investigates and supports intellectual, emotional, psychological, social, and behavioral maladjustment. It also interfaces with disability and discomfort, and minor adjustment issues, as well as severe psychopathology. So where do clinical psychologists work, you may be wondering? Again, going back to assessment, we do a lot of diagnostic interviewing, behavioral assessment, administration and interpretation of psychological test measures. In provision of the clinical aspect now of the services, we work at the primary, secondary, and tertiary levels. And so we provide clinical services to individuals, families, and groups. And when we talk about clinical psychology is the discipline in psychology which is most closely aligned with health. So that's where you get the clinical presentation. We also consult within psychological groups and professionals and other health professionals. We also do research. So we engage with specific research and critical review of science, knowledge, and methods pertaining to clinical psychology and mental health in general. So clinical psychologists assess, diagnose, and in diagnosing, we tend to use the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, as well as the ICD, which is the European-based approach to assessment. And we treat individuals in one-to-one or individual settings, families, and groups. So you may find us working in hospitals, mental health clinics, private practice, universities, research-based organizations, as well as in academia or education, where you may teach or lecture. So do you want to be a clinical psychologist? So if you're in the US, you must have a bachelor's degree in psychology and then a graduate degree which culminates in a PhD or a Psych D, which is the PsyD. So the persons who do the Psych D, they intend to do clinical work because the Psych D focuses on therapy and the clinical type of work. So you will find them more so in mental health clinics and psychiatric hospitals. Graduate degrees in the US take 5 to 7 years to complete, and your training must include theory, research, clinical work, and it also includes a comprehensive exam. In Canada, in British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, Nova Scotia, and Prince Edward Island, a doctoral degree is necessary, plus 1 year of supervised experience you have to be a psychologist, regardless of the type of psychology you practice. Quebec recently phased in a doctoral requirement, and some of the other provinces like Alberta, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland require only a master's degree for entry into the profession. But it is important to note that almost every clinical psychology training program is geared towards the trained person to the doctoral level. And if you apply to a program saying you want a terminal master's degree, maybe say a terminal master's degree, meaning that you only want to do a master's degree, well, they're not likely to accept you. So I would say it's in your best interest to focus on a doctoral program. In the UK, you will need a degree. I think Dr. Dennison mentioned this before. You will need a degree accredited by the British Psychological Society and 3 years of postgraduate study leading to a doctorate in clinical psychology. In the UK, they tend to do what is called concurrent theory and practice, where you are in the classroom for a period of time and then you go into the clinical area and then you go back and forth. Now, what about Barbados? Currently in Barbados, the law allows someone trained at the master's level in clinical psychology to be called a clinical psychologist. But in keeping with global standards, this is expected to change. You must be registered with the Barbados Paramedical Council, which, as Ms. Patrick Dre indicated, the name has been changed to Allied Health Professions Council. You must pay an annual registration fee to the Registrar's Department, which is located in the Supreme Court, and this is termed professional registration. Now, being registered with the Paramedical Council and then you pay your registration fee allows you what may be termed in other places to be licensed to practice. So without these two steps, you cannot practice as a registered person or a licensed psychologist in Barbados. And it is also important to know that you cannot practice as a clinical psychologist with a bachelor's degree. With regard to training in the Caribbean, the only current program that I am aware of is the Master's in Clinical Psychology at the UWI Mona campus. There was a PhD, but that is now, that has been halted for the time being. And there was a Master of Clinical Psychology at the UWI St. Augustine, but that has been discontinued. I recently spoke with the department there, and I think that there are plans, there is discussion in the works for a PhD in clinical psychology, but I'm sure that when that becomes available, you will be informed. And there was one other thing I was about to say. Right, the related occupations, we work very closely and we are closely aligned with psychiatrists, counseling psychologists, forensic psychologists, psychiatric or nurse practitioners, registered mental health or psychiatric nurses, community psychiatric nurses, clinical social workers, and counselors. And I know I'm out of time, but I just want to briefly mention that as far as job prospects in Barbados are concerned, there is much scope for clinical psychologists. When you hear about all the various challenges that we encounter as individuals, but there are not a lot of positions in terms of government posts. We are hoping that that's something that, there will be discussions about and that those can be increased. But in the government setting, there are clinical psychologists at the psychiatric hospital, in the Ministry of Education. I think there may also be in the police and in the penal system. And there's also clinical psychologists employed at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. Certainly you can work in private practice and you can be a consultant working with various private organizations. And last but not least, you can work in academia. You can work at a college or university lecturing or teaching. I would say in wrapping up that clinical psychology is a really important profession and we need more of them here. And it's important that we possibly agitate to have more of them trained for Barbados. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ben. We have a couple questions coming in. Ashanti Jones asks, can you have a specialized clinical psychologist?
Well, to answer that, I would say just yes. Clinical psychology is seen as a generalist type of training. So when you are a clinical psychologist, you can do a lot. But if you wanted to be a child psychologist, you have to first do clinical psychology and then specialize in child psychology. Similarly to it is advised that if you wanted to do forensic psychology where you work to be able to maybe rehabilitate prisoners in the penal system, that it would be good for you to have done clinical psychology and then specialize as a forensic psychologist. So those are some of the specialties based on clinical psychology.
The questions are rolling. Would a doctorate be necessary to become a lecturer? Tammy Linton asks.
No, you don't necessarily have to have a doctorate to be a lecturer, but it enhances much your chances of promotion and your tenure and things like that.
All righty. We have, do clinical psychologists counsel as well, or is it only diagnosing and working with people with psychological pathologies?
What was that again?
Do clinical psychologists counsel as well, or is it only diagnosing and working with people with psychological pathologies?
Yes, we do.
Absolutely.
Right. So working with persons with psychological pathologies or maybe some just emotional distress, that involves counseling. That is an integral aspect of what the clinical and the counseling psychologist does. But
Absolutely.
as I said again, the clinical psychologist tends to go maybe more in depth, as well as they tend to deal more with the more chronic and entrenched mental health problems.
Okay. Logan Thompson asks, could Dr. Ben please suggest where she'd recommend studying to be a clinical psychologist?
I would hesitate to tell you where to go and study.
Mm-hmm.
But I would indicate to you where training is available. There are training and institutions in the United States, as I mentioned, in Canada, in the UK, and as well as in other areas in Europe. In the Caribbean, there is, as I said, also training available at Mona. They used to have the PhD program, but that is in abeyance at the time. And the University of the West Indies, again, St. Augustine campus, they are in discussion regarding the establishment of a PhD clinical psychology program, but I have no information as to when that will happen. But I suggest that you keep your eyes on the lookout, and it certainly does not hurt to reach out to them from time to time to to gain more information. With regard to training, I did my training for my master's at Mona, and I would say that it was quite a comprehensive program. It was 2 years, but it was like 3 or 4 years of work packed into two. So it was very, very intense. And if your pocket doesn't necessarily allow you um, to go internationally, I would suggest that well, not suggest, I would indicate that Mona is an option for you.
Okay. We have, would you recommend doing the Masters for Clinical Psychology online?
I to say the truth, no. I think that like nursing, like medicine, clinical psychology is a hands-on being their type of training. While you can possibly successfully complete theoretical training online, because that would mean doing a lot of reading and assignments and things like that. It is in your best interest to be there. When you're testing somebody, you have to be face to face with them so that you get, or you, it is better for you to be face to face with them so that you get the full appreciation in terms of observation of a client, developing that therapeutic alliance with the client, and where you actually have to do like intakes and interviewing. Those skills of observation are really critically important. And going into a mental health setting and seeing what it looks like and interacting with your clients in that setting is vitally important. So I would suggest that it is better for you to do a master of clinical psychology face to face.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Ben. I'm going to invite all the panelists now to show their videos, and we'll just meet for some final questions quickly before we get some remarks from Professor Maynard. So I have a question for the panelists. How do you view your role now as when you had first graduated? Has it changed? Are you doing exactly what you wanted to do? What has changed between then and now for you?
What has changed for me? Maybe the volume, or certainly the volume of work.
Absolutely.
Because as a trainee, as a student, you do not get the full import of what you have to do, of everything that has to be done. So I think that has changed more for me. But over time, I would say that I have grown to like my profession one more.
Good. What about you, Dr. Dennison?
Yeah, it's interesting because when I trained in the UK and was a psychologist in London and then Dorset, and then I moved here. So I think over in the UK, I was doing more systems level work. So it was working with the school as an institution, helping develop things like anti-bullying policies, training up peer mentors to work with younger children. It was wider work, whereas here it's more individual student led. Yeah, it's, I think, like I said in my presentation, it's never a dull moment. It
Never
can
dull.
literally be
Certainly.
very different every single day.
single
So there are some common themes that are in existence, no matter where you are and who you're working with. You know, we all are humans. We have
Right.
anxieties, we have difficulties, but we all have strengths as well. So
That's right.
yeah, so a lot's changed, but a lot's the same as well.
What about Miss Jakes?
I think as a fresh graduate, I was thinking, you know, yes, I've learned all this stuff. I'm going to change the world. One client.
That's right.
No, I'm more realizing, you know what, it doesn't quite work like that. You expect the unexpected. Persons will have setbacks. We're all human, like Dr. Dennison said, and it's not always going to go in a linear fashion. So I'm kind of now more learning to go with the flow and, you know, roll with the punches and enjoy the journey throughout the career.
What would you tell your student self? No.
I would tell myself, you know what, it is worth it. I think that's what I would tell myself. It is worth it, and keep pushing through and take the lessons in as you get them.
Okay. Anyone else? Alrighty. Let me apologize really quickly. We seem to have some technical difficulties with Mr. Pilgrim's presentation. He was supposed to join us his afternoon. We are having some challenges, so let me apologize really quickly for that. I'm going to invite Professor Maynard now to give some closing remarks. Thank you so much to the panelists, by the way.
Thank you.
Alrighty.
Pleasure.
Good afternoon, everyone. I too would like to thank the panelists and Mr. Judon Knight for doing such a wonderful job at keeping things rolling. And I thank you, the audience, for fielding your questions. We appreciate them very much, and I hope that the answers are useful to you. I'm here today really and truly to help close off. I'm going to tell you a little bit about who we are as an association. We're the Barbados Society of Psychology. We're an organization of psychologists and related mental health professionals. Our association was officially launched in 2001, and then it was referred to as the Barbados Association of Psychologists. We changed the name and opened up our admission policy for membership because we had so many people going out there and studying different subfields of psychology, such as behavioral psychology, forensic psychology, and traditionally, the psychologists that would have been members of the Barbados Association of Psychologists would have been clinical counseling or educational psychologists. We have a number of objectives, but some of the main ones that I'm going to mention are that we aim to promote further development of psychology as a professional discipline in Barbados. We have established and we protect the Code of Professional Ethics and Standards in the practice of psychology in Barbados. And we also aim to publish and circulate books, materials, monographs, and so forth among not only our members, but to the general public. And one of our major activities is the Psychology Week, which we host every year. We try to do it around the time of Mental Health Awareness Month. And that's why we're here in October with you. Okay, so I hope that you enjoyed the presentation. I'm now going to move on to a few words from our president. These are her words. I'm speaking them on her behalf. Our president is Miss Noemi White. And she said that psychology and mental health as concepts within the community have come a long way. Research, social media, self-help books, and testimonies of famous personalities have all helped raise awareness about the need for care of the human mind in wellness or illness, and about the acceptability of doing so with professional guidance. Mental self-care is a priority. And I think that came out in Vanya's presentation this afternoon, the importance of self-care. October the 10th, 2020, this year, marked World Mental Health Day with the theme Mental Health for All. And we've taken that theme and expanded on a little bit, and we've said mental health for all, mental health today. It's very much an active part of who we are in our lives for everybody. The current life-changing climate been affected, by the global pandemic, highlights the necessity for psychosocial support and mental self-care as a foundation for greater resilience more than ever. Many people, as we know, are experiencing anxiety surrounding their own or others' health. Many are mourning the loss of a loved one, sometimes compounded by the inability to physically join their family members for the funeral arrangements. Many are experiencing hopelessness and despair based on the loss of income and dire economic outlook. Many adults and children are struggling to adapt to the novel online education or emergency online education, teaching and learning. Many family members suffer psychologically during the measures of lockdown that we would have all experienced, and the list of concerns continues. So clearly, this highlights the need for people in our profession to come forward. And as you know, yes, we're in the midst of it now, but the long-term effects are also going to be there. So the need for psychologists is definitely going to increase with time. Nevertheless, our president is still hopeful and of course sheds the positive light on the fact that our personal strength and resilience can be birthed in times of struggle, and relationships can be fortified, creative pathways to new income can be developed, and faith can be renewed. So we are inviting you all to reach out to us. You can follow us on social media. We're on Facebook and Instagram. You can join some more of our events that we have online for this week. We have a public webinar tomorrow where we'll have some psychologists speaking to our current situation. And we really encourage you to join us and support us. Our membership, at the moment, our membership body consists of professional psychologists, researchers, as well as graduate students. So we do have opening for graduate students to join, but we also, our general meetings from month to month are also open to the public. So you as undergraduate students, if you have an interest in coming and seeing what we do and get an idea of our association, you're quite welcome. And you're also welcome to volunteer some of your services to assist us in many of the activities that we engage in. Thank you again for joining us today. I miss the in-person interaction, yes, and the hand clapping and all that kind of stuff. But I'm sure that you appreciate that these are all very busy people, and they saw it as important enough to take the time and come and share with you all to provide a little insight into what it really is like being a psychologist, how to become a psychologist within the Caribbean. I have to say one last thing. I know that most of you know that I work for the University of West Indies, so I feel vindicated in saying this. If you're interested in clinical psychology, I highly recommend that you do pursue it within the Caribbean if you intend to live in the Caribbean. Because from my own experience, the cultural nuances and the differences yes, that exist when you do all of your studies outside of Barbados and then, or outside the Caribbean, and then come to work in the Caribbean, there is quite a learning curve and adjustment phase that you have to go through. So we do have a good program at Mona. We are working across the 3 campuses. We're working towards a PhD program. So I'm hoping that maybe in the next 2 to 3 years, we will have that on board. So thank you again for joining us. I'll hand you back now to Jadon Knight. Thank you, our wonderful host.
Thank you so much, Professor Maynard, who's a professor of psychology at the University of West Indies. Once again, thank you everybody for coming out. Brings us to the end of today's presentation. It will be available on YouTube, correct? If I'm correct. So if you want to see this whole presentation again, you can see it at YouTube. Don't forget to follow us on our social media pages, Facebook and Instagram. And thank you for coming.
Thank you.
All righty.
Bye. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
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 Can someone give me some